Global markets are rallying after a US trade court blocked most of President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs. Markets in Asia and Europe are up amid hopes that the ruling will ease market volatility. The court found Trump overstepped his authority by invoking an emergency law to impose the levies. The judges ruled the US Constitution only gave Congress exclusive powers to regulate trade with other nations. Their ruling does not apply to sector-specific tariffs like cars or steel and aluminium. The Trump administration is appealing the decision. Well, to find out more about this, I'm joined by Kathleen Brooks, a research director at the trading platform XTB and founder of Minerva Analysis. Great to have you on the show, Kathleen. It's been some roller coaster recently, to say the least. Can you tell us more about how global markets are responding to this ruling?
Well, as the news hit, global markets, they just rallied. They absolutely surged. We saw a big surge higher in US equity futures and obviously European futures. European stocks had a very good open as well. But it seems like that rally's really lost steam, and we seem to have squeezed as much upside as we can from this news because it doesn't really tell us anything. They've got 10 days to either change the tariffs or use some other legislation to put them in. We know that they've appealed. We know that it doesn't impact sector tariffs. What we don't know is how tariffs will end up. So this is just the start of a long legal battle. And I think this doesn't add any certainty to global trade policy going forward.
You said it there, it doesn't add any certainty, but the Trump administration has appealed the ruling. So we're talking about, as we've just been saying, yet more uncertainty while the process takes place. So for businesses, and from the perspective of businesses, whether they be big or small, how are they coping with all of this?
Resiliency in the economy, because we came into this crisis at a fairly strong level. There wasn't, particularly in the US, I would argue. With Europe and the UK, it was slightly weaker footing. But I think economies have been really resilient, particularly in the first months of the year. As this gets dragged on, if this becomes a long legal battle, then essentially it could delay the onset of tariffs. But I don't think that necessarily helps people in terms of, or helps businesses, large or small, with investment decisions, where to invest, and also hiring decisions. So we could see some weakness on the back of this. Now, of course, there are other ways that President Trump can implement tariffs. He can go very much down the sector route. We know that he's looking at tariffs for pharma, and he can also implement, whilst he's not allowed to implement emergency rulings for tariffs, he can implement the unfair practices law to do it. So he might need to be working very hard with his team to switch his tariffs around and the laws that he's using to try and pass them.
Right. Now, the White House has been using these tariffs to try and negotiate better trade deals all around the world. Well, that's what they're saying. What's your take on this? Has it weakened or strengthened the US's position?
Well, I think it's pretty much a neutral. Obviously, you're going to have legal pushback. So you could argue that at the first stage, it looks like it's weakened their position. However, going forward, this legal battle will probably end up in the Supreme Court, of which there are 6 Republican justices. So they may end up taking the side of Donald Trump anyway. I think that this could actually just, almost invoke more fury from the White House in some ways. We may see another range of retaliatory tariffs going forward and other economic plans, but it certainly leaves everything a little bit more up in the air. I think that in terms of retaliatory action or strengthening negotiating positions, particularly for the EU, I think they would be wise to take a very diplomatic approach because obviously this is an issue between Trump and his lawyers. He has appealed it and he may yet win. So what they don't want to do is poke the bear almost.
It sounds like that roller coaster ride is far from over. We'll leave it there. Kathleen, great to have your thoughts on this. Kathleen Brooks, a research director at the trading platform XTB and founder of Minerva Analysis. Have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by David Kleimann, who is a senior associate of the ODI Europe think tank in Brussels. Good to have you with us, David. I want to start with some context. How big a blow is this to Trump's trade overhaul?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, first of all, this ruling by the Court of International Trade means that Mr. Trump is really finding his limits in what he dislikes most, and that is constitutional checks and balances and the rule of law. But just to briefly recapitulate, the US Constitution is quite clear, as you said, that it provides the authority to regulate international commerce is vested with US Congress, and the executive authority to do so can only stem from specific congressional delegations. There are a number of legislative congressional delegations to the executive, but the statute that Mr. Trump has invoked for these worldwide tariffs, the court says, are not limitless. And in fact, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, has so far only been used to impose economic sanctions, but not tariffs. Those sanctions would also require unusual or extraordinary threats during a national emergency. And the judges did not see these conditions met and declared the executive orders that are advancing these tariffs as invalid. Now, there are two more instances, the US Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, which will have to likely rule on this matter, but it's quite clear already that the court has kneecapped Trump's most expeditious tariff endeavors and thereby injected additional yet quite welcome uncertainty to international trade with the US.
So, David, how are the markets responding to this ruling, and how do you think they're likely to behave over the next few days?
Well, the markets have modestly welcomed this ruling quite cautiously, I would say, up until now. But this is really just a short-term and eventual short-term bet on the eventual effects on the real economy, and what those effects will be remains uncertain and depend on the ultimate Supreme Court ruling here. And whether the Trump administration will really change tactics and move to invoke other congressional authorities, such as Section 301 or 232, going forward.
Trump's administration is, with these tariffs, trying to lock in better trade deals for the US all around the world. It is fluid, though. Where does this leave those negotiations now?
Well, for any trade negotiator, the lack of legal authority to conduct negotiations in the first place, and in this case, the lack of legal authority to use tariffs as a leverage, is pretty much the worst case scenario, as it undermines the ability to extract concessions. And Trump's counterparts now have quite additional incentives to extend the time frame of these negotiations and wait and see what the courts will decide. So it really is not a good scenario for USTR, for Jameson Greer, and for Scott Bessent to enter into conversations with the European Union and with China and others.
David Kleimann, thanks so much for your input.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, for more on this, I'm joined by Daniel Winter from DW's Business Desk. Good to see you, Daniel. I want to start from the beginning, I guess, the market reaction. What's going on?
That's right. Well, you'll forgive markets for not having a massive leap on the news because, of course, there is a little bit of uncertainty, let's say, around the ruling and how the Trump administration will react next. But what we can see in Asian and European trading is that markets are up. And also, when we look at US futures, it's pointing to a rise when the trading day begins in New York a little bit later. So, so far, cautious optimism.
Right. So Trump's team has already launched an appeal against the ruling. So where do these tariffs stand right as of now?
Well, they've got 10 days to comply with the ruling, and the timeline then for lifting tariffs is unclear. Could it happen within that period? What are we expecting from a potential appeal as well? Or, as we know, Trump in the past has ignored court rulings. That would be an extremely controversial thing to do in this particular case, but it's happened before, and we cannot predict exactly Trump's reaction. You and me know that from the months of reporting on him so far. The ruling essentially says that Trump's orders that he gave in order to implement these tariffs are just far too broad and unjustified. He initially said that this is because of fentanyl. There's a national emergency and we want to block the imports of this dangerous drug into the US, but then impose these blanket worldwide tariffs on everyone. And so they say, the court says that this is just far too broad and you cannot justify it. However, it doesn't apply to things like aluminium and cars and all of these other things. So it's not like overnight we're going to see a massive shift to being completely, the tariffs being out the window. What is kind of confusing at the moment, though, is what about refunds? All of the businesses and people who've paid the tariffs in the US, because it is a tax on US businesses in the end, will they get their money back? We just don't know yet.
Uncertainty seems to be the key word. Where does this leave parties then currently negotiating trade deals with the US, as the EU is doing right now?
Okay, well, you know, one lawyer said that you'd be a fool to negotiate over tariffs which have now been said to be illegal. But for the EU's case, it is worried about these steel and aluminium and car tariffs in particular. So the EU obviously now has a stronger hand in talks if this ruling does stick. But Trump still has tools to push back against the EU in any trade negotiation, apart from those tariffs which still apply. Like I said, there's possible new measures via Congress which Trump could aim for. That would be long and complicated, but is still something that he can hold in his back pocket. And also there's other leverage, things like agricultural quotas or, you know, about standards for manufacturing and this kind of thing, which he can always lean back on when it comes to a negotiation. But just before we came to air, I spoke to economist Meredith Crowley from Cambridge University, who made an important point, and she said that US exports are likely to continue to suffer from the unpredictability. We're not going to expect them to necessarily return, certainly not straight away, to where they would have been if these tariffs hadn't been introduced in the first place.
Incredible. Staying with the White House, one more key player I want to talk about, Elon Musk, who has been the key advisor to Donald Trump, his closest perhaps, has now left the administration. What effect do you think his departure now has on Trump's economic policy going forward? Well,
it's all due to this fiscal bill that Trump put forward, which essentially massively increases the deficit. We're talking trillions and trillions of dollars over 10 years, while at the same time imposing tax breaks on companies and the richest in the country. And, of course, Elon Musk's big project within DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, was to try and make cuts in order to save the deficit. So this has completely undone that. Certainly doesn't fit into any sort of economic logic. Now, the question is whether the Department of Government Efficiency may now be more coherent without the chaotic communication strategy that it had under Elon Musk, but whether anything actually changes in the underlying way that the department operates. You know, will it target things differently now that he's gone? I doubt that, because the leaders of the department are following mostly the Trump line. And when you don't follow the Trump line, you exit, just like Elon Musk did. So the big issue that also kind of links back to the tariffs is that the income from these tariffs was meant to offset some of that deficit as well. And now that's unraveled because of this massive fiscal policy on the one hand, but also the trade ruling on the other. This is not a coherent economic or trade policy anymore. So despite all of these rulings and everything like that, the economic policy within the Trump administration remains chaotic.
There's an awful lot to chew on in Trump administration 2.0. Daniel, thanks for helping us digest the latest news. Thanks.